Before we get into creating that two variable data table that is in the chapter, I'm going to show you a little simpler one because the one in the chapter is kind of complicated and it doesn't need to be that complicated. Okay, what I've set up here is a payment calculation, okay, where we've got a loan, we've got a number of years and an interest rate. And you guys have seen this before. Okay, so we're basically taking the interest rate, dividing it by 12 to get months, and then we take the number of years and multiply that by 12 to get months, and then we take our loan. And we want to know at these different interest rates and the different loan values what our payments are going to be. So where the values in the table intersect, cell A6, that is where the equation needs to go. So I'm going to key in an equal sign, and I'm going to click on the equation and press enter. So I've created a linking cell. And then what I'm going to do is highlight the entire table. I'm going to go into data. Whoop, highlight the entire table again here. We'll go into data, what if analysis, and data table. Now with the two variable table, two different things are changing. Okay, so you do have to give Excel kind of a reference point so it knows where to plug the data in. Okay, because we have multiple cell references, it needs to know kind of what goes with what. So row input. When I am looking at the rows and I'm inputting 3, 3.5, and 4, okay, what is going to be varying? Well, it's going to be the loan amount, correct? So what I need to do then for my row input cell is select the loan amount. Now, when I'm working on the columns here, and I'm going down within a column, what's going to be changing is the percentages. So my column input cell is going to be interest. And then once I've got that entered, we're going to click OK. Okay, and it basically is generating the payments. And they're negative because it's money out of your pocket. Okay, so looking at your equation, okay, you have things that are varying. And when you set the table up, and this is what I think is the tricky part, so we'll go in and do it again. When you set the table up, where it says row input cell, the way you have to look at that is you have to look at the data that you have at the beginning of the row. So I've got 3%. So when I come to this first cell, I got to plug in 50,000, and then I've got to plug in 60, and then I got to plug in 70. Those are my loan values. So I got to click on the original loan value. And then for my columns, so when I'm in 50,000, I'm kind of going down in the column, what do I need to plug in? Well, I need to plug in the different interest values. So for column input cell, I got to select interest. Okay, and then when you click OK, it'll generate correctly. Now we'll go to the one in the book, which is a little bit more complicated. And the reason it's a little bit more complicated is because we have an equation for cost per unit, and then the result of that is used in another equation. And the second equation is basically trying to figure out, how do I make a profit? Okay, so if I take the cost and I add in the cost multiplied by my markup percent, I am guaranteed a profit unless my markup percent is 0. Okay, so what this is asking is for these different costs and these different markup percentages, how is that going to impact my selling price? Okay, because I want to make a profit, okay, and if I take the cost and add in the cost times the markup, use that for my selling price, that will ensure that I get a profit. Now, the tricky part is going to come in when we are telling Excel what cells to use for the column and the row. That is where it gets a little tricky with this, okay? Because you're probably thinking, well, I'll just go to this intersection point and I'm going to key in an equal sign, and we already know we want to know the selling price. So we'll go ahead and click on that equation, press enter. That's all pretty straightforward. Okay, then we highlight the table. That's also pretty straightforward. It's when we get into data table here where it gets a little trickier. So when we are looking at our rows, what we are varying is the percent. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. So we can actually, for the row input cell, click right on the percent. Okay, so that in itself is not too tricky. Now, when we get to the column, though, that is a little trickier, okay? Because when we're in this column here, what's varying is total cost. Well, total cost was not in our equation. Okay, we're looking at the selling price per unit. The total cost up here isn't part of that equation. So that is where it gets a little bit tricky. What we need to do for the column input is actually click on the standard production units. And you're probably thinking, why wouldn't I click on total cost? It's going to kind of go back to the cost per unit equation, and what you're missing from that is the units themselves. Okay, so because our selling price per unit is using a value from another equation, we have to go back to that equation and look for the piece that Excel doesn't know, and it doesn't know about the units. So that's what we have to tell it to use. So we're going to go ahead and click OK, and then we will get the various selling prices. And then we can save our changes. And you can understand now why I showed you the simpler example, because this is a lot more complicated than it needed to be.